All right, here we go. OverDrive, off and running. TSN 1050 on the TSN app, your home smart speaker, and up on TSN 2. Bryan Hayes, Frankie Corrado, and there he is, Jason Strudwick. What's happening, boys?
What's up, I just want to apologize. I missed a couple other assignments. I had some technical issues, and I know that many of my fans out there in the East were pretty rattled, and not a good way to kick off the end of July, guys. So I want to just start out with a heartfelt apology.
That's nice of you. Fans. That's nice of you. There was a few unhappy people in here in the end of July when we found out 10 minutes before the show that Struddy's equipment wasn't working, and we made it work. It wasn't the same. I'm not going to lie, Struddy. We missed you a lot, but it's nice to have you back.
Well, that's disappointing to hear that they missed out on your content, Struddy, at the end of July. But it's good to have you back. It sounds like you're good. It looks like you're good. And, yeah, people in the East, man, they were not reacting well. The big story in Southern Ontario recently has been people going to the bathroom on beaches, allegedly to the point where Doug Ford had to issue a statement. I'm sure he never thought he'd have to.
Someone had to say it.
Please stop. Please stop.
What?
Yeah, we have the clip. You want to hear it? Because this is, and I'm blaming you, Struddy. This never happened before you had technical difficulties. And all of a sudden, you have technical difficulties, and everyone starts losing their minds because they want Struddy and they want the Strud Muffins, and you stole the Strud Muffins. So this is what Doug Ford had to say in response to people losing their minds over no Struddy.
People are respectful enough that, folks, don't be pooping on the beach. Simple as that, man. We have no proof of it either. And this social media, they get rolling on the social media. So, yeah. I just they have to work with the folks here. I think.
Yeah. There you go, Struddy. So I'm holding you personally responsible for that kind of activity if it's actually happening, which I'm not sure that it is. But I don't want to go and seek that out myself. I'm not going to investigate that.
What's crazy to me now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I can no longer use Porta Potties. I just the smell in there, it just makes me cringe, and then the filth. So I'm not saying I've done this recently, but I have been known to go to the Porta Potty, then go behind it, a big wall, and then I use the facilities behind the Porta Potties rather than actually going in the Porta Potty. The smell in there is disgusting, man. It's just disgusting.
You
look at the shrapnel all over the place.
For us, can you clarify that it's a number 1 and not a number 2 behind the Porta Potty? Please, for the love of God.
No, I'd never do. I'd dig a hole first. No, but those Porta Potties, can you go in there? That smell.
It's
wild.
I
don't care how much hand sanitizer I use after.
Yeah, it's a wild scene. Especially, I'm not a festival guy. I never really have been, but I've been. When I was in my 20s, teenager, I'd do stuff. You couldn't pay me to go to a 3-day festival now. The idea that people are doing this, but day 3 of a festival, where you're going in there, you're basically you're putting your life on the line in there.
Taking years off your life.
You're taking years off your life, and there's a chance you're coming out there and you're just not the same person anymore.
Right.
There's a very good chance. So I hear what you're saying, Strud, and you got to be careful. We're just, people are disappointed. They missed out on you. There was a lot of wild and wacky stuff allegedly happening.
Don't look down when you're afraid of heights. Don't look down when you're at the Porta Potty. Do not take a look at what is floating around in there.
Robot eyes. You stare. You close your eyes if you have to, and you get out of there as quickly as you can. It's mandatory.
You got to change every sense, your ears, your hearing, your smell, the eyes, obviously the taste. I don't want to have anything to do with those parts. I can't do it. I cannot do it anymore. I send my kids in there on single missions. One time, I held on so long. I literally, my eyes were floating because my only option was there and I couldn't get behind it. I couldn't get far enough behind the Porta Potties to pee on them. So I just hung on for dear life. It must have been a record, a 3-minute pee after.
Freddie, let me ask you this. If you had ended up in a Porta Potty, how quickly after getting home do you press the eject button on those clothes? Or do they even make it inside your house? It's everyone get undressed in the garage. The clothes are not coming in this house. They're in the garbage bin.
I mean, I have a shower immediately upon returning from home, but I don't understand people that go in there and take care of number 2. They're sitting down. I know friends that have hung jackets up. They've hung up their jacket in there.
Is there a hook in there? Who's looked for a hook?
Why don't you just let me hold your jacket? It's fine, they say. I'm it's not fine. You don't know what's been hanging on that hook. There could be any number of things. Listen, I'm not an elitist at all, but that is one thing I cannot do. Like, I'm fine when you put some nuts on a bar. I eat those nuts. I go in there and I mix and mingle with everybody else. Yeah. But zero chance of using a porta potty.
That's disappointing. Here we go. Is there going to be an issue here with Strud? I mean, listen, that's the porta potty companies possibly saying we can't continue with this.
Doug Ford, he's chiming in right now.
It could be Doug Ford himself. But that's Western elitism right there, right? Like, the West always looks down on us here in Toronto and Southern Ontario, and Struddy's leading that charge. He always stokes those issues between the two portions of the country, the two sides of the country. We always say, well, elitism in Toronto, and everyone thinks they're better than everyone else. When it comes to porta potties, there's elitism clearly in the West, because I think we're cool with that here in the East. And I think it's important we establish that early. So I'm glad you did that, Strud. It's good to have you back. It's good to see you, Frankie. We got Steve Phillips coming up later in the hour. Mark Shapiro spoke today. And I appreciate that he spoke. There wasn't a lot that came out of it, but there was some messaging. And we're going to play a couple of clips and we'll get into it. But the big three in the city of Toronto it's Shapiro, Shanahan, Ujiri. Those are the three guys who are running the operations, right? And obviously they have bosses above them. Keith Pelly with Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, the Rogers board when it comes to the Blue Jays. And there are people they have to answer to. There's people that they have to filter stuff through in terms of budgeting, in terms of vision, in terms of game plans. But really, the architects of basically anything that matters within the organizations, Blue Jays, Maple Leafs, Raptors, it's Shapiro, Shanahan, Ujiri, respectfully. And they have GMs that do speak fairly often, Atkins and, Bobby speaks for the Raptors occasionally and Tree Living speaks for the Leafs. But these are the three guys that I think need to be out more than they are, And Shapiro speaks, a couple times a year. Ujiri speaks more often than the other two probably combined. Shanahan, I don't recall the last time he spoke spontaneously. I think it's been years since he's done that. He'll speak at the end of the year. He'll do the end of the year press conference, but that's about it. And I think fans deserve to hear from these three guys because of the power that they wield and because of the jobs that they hold. So Shapiro speaking today, I think, is important. It should happen. Let the dust breathe a little, or let it breathe a little bit in terms of post-trade deadline. The season is what it is. They won last night. Good for them. But we know where this is going. It's not good. And people want to know what's going on. So he was asked about Ross Atkins. Why don't we play this clip first? Because Ross has been in the firing line of Blue Jay fans because, again, he's the GM. He's the guy that's out in front of this more often than not. I think Shapiro deserves just as much heat. If you hate on what Ross Atkins has been bringing to the table recently, don't stop at him. Because, again, Mark Shapiro has his fingerprints all over everything. Nothing happens of significance within the Blue Jays organization unless Mark Shapiro has signed off on it. But he was asked about the future of Atkins, and here's how he answered that.
I very rarely am unequivocal about anything. Commenting on job status during a season throughout my entire career when I've been asked about those things is not something I have or will ever do. That being said, contextually, I'm a huge believer in stability and continuity, and that those are competitive advantages in professional sports, that reacting and change don't necessarily mean improvement. So we need to be better. We have to be better. I think stability and continuity and making adjustments are where I'm focused right now.
So I think you can take that as Ross Atkins, in a perfect world for Mark Shapiro, will return. Now, again, Mark Shapiro has bosses, and his bosses are in charge of writing the checks and making sure that the fan bases are happy and the fans are buying tickets. And there's a marketing component to this and a sales pitch component to this. So it may ultimately get to a point where Mark is effectively told, regardless of how you feel about that philosophy, you might have to make a change. But I think if you're a Blue Jay fan, and you guys chime in on this and correct me if I'm wrong, Shapiro and Atkins have been running the show for 9 years. That's a lot of continuity. Like, it's not as if anyone is asking for some brash decision a year into a new administration or 2 years into a new plan. Like if it's a 5-year rebuild, 2 years in, people aren't yelling and screaming saying, this isn't working for us. You've been here for 9 years. They have not won one playoff game, and this year's been an unmitigated disaster.
Yes.
So I think that's a card he should be careful playing because I don't think it's going to land. And I think people will challenge him and say, then how do you explain 9 years of continuity without any success?
I'll tell you
if
how
continuity matters so much.
This is how you explain what goes on with Shapiro and Atkins. Anytime both of these guys talk, it's like if you've ever been on LinkedIn and someone sends you a DM talking about all this, business jargon, synergies, and all these words that don't really mean anything, but they say them. And I feel like Shapiro coming out today and saying what he said is basically his way of saying nothing and just, putting out fires. Because if he comes out and he says, yeah, I'm not exactly happy with the roster that Ross put together, he's also putting himself in the line of fire by saying that, because everything has to go through him. And then Ross Atkins is a dead man walking. So now this kind of kicks the can down the road a little bit to say, okay, it's not a vote of confidence, but I'm not exactly putting him under the bus, because I'm also putting myself under the bus by doing that. And then, once the season ends, we can kind of evaluate things. But it's a lot of words that don't really mean anything. And that has been, synonymous with this group for quite a while now, anytime they talk.
Yeah, I hear you. I agree with you, Frank. And I think as a fan, I want to see the team improve every year, or try to improve every year, whether that's, the drafting and developing, or your team on the field, or whatever you're talking about. And I don't know that we've seen that over the 9 years here for this group and this group of leaders. So I do think they have to take a hard look at what they've done and how they're approaching it, because it feels like they're going backwards rather than forwards, guys, right now.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the way this season has played out, and Shapiro referenced the bullpen as a significant issue, and it has been, and the injuries were substantial, of course. But the offense is anemic again, and that was the issue a year ago. The bullpen was stout a year ago. The rotation was exceptional a year ago. Health was not an issue a year ago. The problem was they could not find clutch hitting. They could not get big hits with runners in scoring position. They did not hit for power, and that remains an issue. So to isolate the bullpen as a significant part of it, again, I think is only painting a really small portion of the picture. But I think when you hear from Shapiro, and again, him coming out, and I think it's been well established for quite some time, Mark is going to remain a part of this program. I think ownership has faith in him. I think he did a great job in terms of what they did with the ballpark, in terms of the renovations. And he's got his fingerprints written or all over that. And I think as a result, ownership believes in that level of continuity at that level. What happens with Atkins and company, I guess, remain to be seen. Again, based on what we heard from Shapiro, would suggest to me he'd like to bring back his crew. Does that mean Schneider returns? I don't know. That could be a completely different story altogether. But I think Atkins has a vote of confidence from Shapiro, would be my guess. But also, if you're a Blue Jay fan, you just got to ride this wave out. It's going to be ugly. You're going to have some good nights like last night. Vladdy, okay, great. Keep doing what you're doing. He did it again last night. Have a couple of kids show up. Maybe every once in a while you show up and Gosman's on the mound or Bassett's on the mound. You get a great start. And it's, worth the price of admission. But wins and losses are what they are, and it's ugly this year. So turn the page on it. What do you think is possible for next year? And there had been a lot of reporting leading up to the trade deadline that the indications throughout the major leagues was that the Blue Jays thought they could contend next year. And that's why they were going to sell the pieces they felt they should, because their contracts were up, but they were not going to move off pieces that had term. And this is what Shapiro had to say about his approach to 2025.
The decision coming out of the deadline and the decisions that we made there are representative of that, was that we believe that there's enough talent in place to build a contending championship caliber team next year. Had we not, we would have made a different set of decisions. So that being said, that work will need to be done to both make sure we continue to develop the players here, identify players that could possibly contribute that are in our system but aren't here, and understand, what to expect from our veteran players, and then do a better job of putting all that together and supplementing externally. So there's a lot of work still to be done before, we can make definitive statements about 25, but that intent is clear.
So there's your answer, which I think we knew, but I think now it's important to put it on the record. If you're calling for a blow-up, rebuild, move on from pieces, it's not going to happen. They're going to come back, I would guess, with Gosman, with Bassett, with Barrios. They'll probably try to augment them with another arm or two in the rotation. They'll try to pump some money and talent and arms into the bullpen. That would suggest to me Vladdy and Bo return next year, and they're going to just hope they stay healthy and put up big numbers and get ready for that pitch.
I'd prefer
that's
that,
what's coming.
I'd prefer that, though.
Like, just be open and honest.
Be open and honest, right, about what you're trying to do. But also, if you go scorched earth and you try and get rid of everyone and you're going to restart this thing, these guys restarted it 9 years ago, and look where it got them. Like, I don't have a lot of confidence that they could do it the second time around and actually get to where they want to go. So, if this is where you're at now, they put themselves in this situation. Just keep throwing it at the wall at this point, because you're not going to have many more goes around this thing. Like, not many groups, regimes, management groups, whatever you want to call them, get 2 cracks at the cycle. You don't get to tear it down twice and rebuild it twice. It's crazy to think that they would be able to do that. So now you're at the end point, and now you got to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And that's what they're going to try and do for next year.
Well, and I think what's scary from that standpoint, if you're a Blue Jay fan, and I think it's scary for every fan base, is if you're calling for scorched earth, like if you're a believer that has to happen. And I'm pretty close to that. I think this has gone awry. Their farm system isn't deep. I don't know if Bichette wants to be a part of this team in the future anyway. I think maybe you got the best out of Gausman the first couple of years. You got the best out of Bassett last year. I question whether or not they can retool the bullpen. There's a lot of work, and Mark said that. Like, to his credit, he did say there's a lot of work. But marrying the two, having belief it can work and putting in the work, I got to see a lot between now and next spring to believe that this is a 90-plus win team next year. But in order for you to possibly be granted that wish, if you want them to go scorched earth and restart and chase Baltimore 3 or 4 years from now, the Yankees 3 or 4 years from now, you probably need ownership to step in to do that. Because you're right. Mark, like Shapiro, can't go in and say, sorry, guys, 9 years later, didn't work. Let me go right back to where I was in 15 and try to reload the whole
So you get
thing.
18 years.
Exactly. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, he knows he has to keep preaching to ownership. We're close. This is a blip on the radar. He has to, Strud.
Yeah, and I think this is what my concern would be, is that the players they traded out weren't necessarily core pieces. Mm-hmm. So then you have to believe in the core you have is good enough to compete with the best around the majors. And there were injuries. There have been injuries. There's no doubt about it. But, if you're a true, honest Blue Jays fan, just 1 to 9 and your top, 3, 4 pitchers and your bullpen, put them beside someone else. Say, is this core, can they compete with what others have in other markets? And I don't see it. And we can talk about, or Shapiro can talk about adding and working hard and adding these pieces, finding other pieces. There may be some significant pieces that need to be added to compete with those top teams. And I have my doubts that this group, with their core as it is, can compete with those higher level teams. Can they bounce back? Yes. But I'm not sure we're talking contender with the core, because you traded away the pieces. No disrespect to the Danny Jansen's, but kind of those more perimeter type players on the team.
I agree. And when you compare and contrast to the other very good elite teams in the American League, and again, Shapiro said championship contender. They never really have been a championship contender at any point. Last year, they were not. They snuck in, they backdoored in. The year before, they were red hot at times, and they won a bunch of ball games. They got to the playoffs, and they got skunked in the wild card against Seattle.
Was that the 8-1?
Yes, that's when they were up 8-1 and ended up blowing that.
Gross.
So they were never really in a position. They haven't won the division. They haven't been a team that's been pushing up on 100 wins. It never materialized at any point, even when they were on their way up a few years ago, where you had a feeling like, okay, this is legitimately championship contender type status. And I agree with your assessment, Strud. Like, when you compare it to what Baltimore has, what the Yankees have, and what they're going to continue to do, they're going to keep adding and growing. Boston's eventually, I think, going to turn that corner. There's good teams in the Central, good teams in the West. If you're going to come back and have Springer, Bichette, and Vladdy, and Varsho, and Kirk, those are your guys, that's not going to cut it. That's just not going to work. You need to add multiple power bats. They need to figure out who's playing in left, who's going to be playing catcher if it can't be Kirk all the time. Clearly,
No.
He just hit his third home run last night.
There was a point though, Hayes, fairly recently, where if you looked at that lineup on any given night on paper, you felt like that was a good team, and you always wanted more. I think that's the main thing that I get from it. On paper, there was name value to a lot of these guys, and I just. A lot of the American pundits would be always high on the Blue Jays. They'd be a sexy pick for a lot of people because there was name value in guys that, had success at different moments in their career, George Springer being one of them. For some reason, it never has really taken off here. It's always been leaving you wanting a little bit more.
And Manoah factors into that.
Yeah.
Alek Manoah was the ace of this staff. 2 years ago, it was his team, and it was going to be Manoah into Gosman, into Barrios, into Bassett, into Kikuchi, and you're like, that can't be topped.
No kidding.
And when the ace just disappears effectively, and eventually guys are going to come back to earth, and injuries are going to pop up, it's a big issue. And, that's happened with Romano's been injured basically all year. They've had real issues in terms of injuries in the bullpen. It's going to be a lot of work, but prepare for it, because over the next 6 months, you're going to hear a lot of, we're in it to win it. We're going to be chasing pieces. The Jays' names are going to come up a ton at the winter meetings. They're going to be connected to everybody. We'll see who they land and what kind of deals they make. But Mark spoke today. I give him credit for coming out and speaking, and I give him credit for putting that on the record. Like, it's not wishy-washy at this point. Like, they're going for it. And if Mark Shapiro's at the top and running the show, he intends on spending the money and trying to acquire talent and try to win ball games next year. So prepare for that if you're a Blue Jay fan.
And you know what? It's one thing, and I think we talked about this recently, but it's one thing to go out there and want to spend the money and want to sign the free agents. You also have to recruit the free agents. Like, you have to have a better sales pitch than the Yankees or the Red Sox, or, go to the National League, the Mets, the Braves, the Padres, the Dodgers. Like, you're competing with a lot of teams that are going to offer the same contract that you're offering. So what's your competitive advantage that you're going to be able to bring in the guys that you want to bring in? Because it's not just one guy that you have to bring in.
Winning's a big part of it.
It's multiple guys that you need to sign, and now you're competing with all the other teams that are in similar positions to the Jays that need to get better through free agency.
Or just like the rich getting richer, right? The Dodgers every year, like, they didn't need Ohtani, but they said, fine, we'll take you. Like, that's the way they operate. The Yankees and the Mets, we'll find a way to squeeze $700 million in. It's true, and winning goes a long way. Like, these reports about Brandon Aiyuk, wide receiver in San Fran, like, it sounds like the New England Patriots were willing to pay the Niners price and pay the Aiyuk price, because it's double-edged sword here. You got to not only acquire them, you got to pay them. And the reports are indicating you just said, no, I'm not interested. And
he wasn't interested in the Patriots?
And the Patriots, and it's the mighty have fallen, man. Brady and Belichick aren't there anymore. Like, you lose Brady and Belichick, what are you in New England? Like, he
has to hitch his wagon to something.
Not a very good team,
right? He has to hitch his wagon to a quarterback that he thinks can make him successful. But, like, think about this from the Niners' point of view. What a mismanagement of the asset. Like, you're not even paying your quarterback yet. Like, the quarterback there, Brock Purdy, is still making under $1 million this year. Like, so you would have had an opportunity to find the money for this guy to make it work. Like, how did you mismanage that?
I guess, there's only so much money to go around. The problem is, if you pay him long term, at some point, Purdy's getting paid.
Oh, yeah.
Like, Brock's going to get paid. You've paid McCaffrey. You've got studs like Bosa and Warner and pieces on the defensive side that make a lot of money.
And every quarterback's getting paid. And
every
Purdy's going to be
getting paid.
He's getting his time, right, Struddy?
Like,
he is. And the problem for San Francisco, I wonder if that wasn't their year last year. Because you remember, Debo missed some time, and Aiyuk stood up, right? And he played really well. So now you lose a little bit of your depth. You have quarterbacks playing for free. You got McCaffrey, who has a lot of carries in his life, a lot of carries. And how long is he going to keep going? He's missing the rest of the preseason, a really good player. But, their windows open and shut pretty quick in the NFL. I think they're even maybe quicker than what we've seen in some other sports.
Yeah, you're right, man. Like, I still think they deserve to be wearing the crown in the NFC. Like, they're the team that you're chasing until they prove the wheels have fallen off. But you're right. It happens quickly in pro sports, man. Look at the Eagles. The Eagles were in a Super Bowl 2 years ago. They started the season 10-1 last year, and then they were a disaster. Like, they had to move out both coordinators. Now everyone's questioning if they can get it back on the rails. There's a report coming out of ESPN today that Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni not on the same page, and Wink Martindale, who was the defensive coordinator of the Giants, got a call from Hurts after the season came to an end, preparing for the Bucs playoff game where they got roasted. The Bucs destroyed the Eagles, and he allegedly, or like, I don't think it's alleged at all, Wink Martindale's on the record saying that Jalen Hurts called him to ask him for tips on how the Giants defended him and defended the Eagles and how the Eagles can get out of that rut. And Martindale said he's been around football forever. He's never had a quarterback do that. He was impressed, of course, because it's kind of like, hey, it's a compliment to me. You're calling me and asking me questions. But if you're Sirianni, if you're the Eagles, like, it's not treason, but are you not thinking, like, why are you calling?
It's a lack of confidence.
Why are you calling
is.
Around asking, like, come to us and we'll break down the tape and we'll figure this out?
You know why the Eagles season went down the crapper? because Big Dom wasn't on the sidelines anymore. Let's
Dom.
call it for what it is. When
Big
Big
Dom.
Dom made his exodus, the season went downhill for the Eagles.
Well, apparently he's got like full sideline credentials now, Big
He
Dom.
better.
Yeah, well,
he better.
You better stay out of the way, too. I mean, you're a security guard, dude. You're not a lineman. Like, the guys are trying to perform here. It's a business, Big Dom. Move. All right, Steve Phillips coming up. It's Sidney Crosby's birthday tonight. Sid the kid's 37 years old. 37 for Sid. And we're all on Sid watch because I think a lot of people thought he'd sign an extension today. And we'll get into Sid, his future in Pitt. We've got Donovan Bailey on the show today, so we'll catch up with the great Donovan Bailey. Can't wait for that just after 5 o'clock. We got Role Play Level of Concern at 5:30. Jason Strudwick in here. Frankie Corrado. I'm Bryan Hayes. OverDrive continues. TSN 1050 and on TSN 2. OverDrive continues. Brought to you by FanDuel, bringing you everything from the opening line to the final score. Donovan Bailey, Role Play Level of Concern in about an hour. Mark Schlereth coming up. A lot of NFL news out there. Christian McCaffrey, calf strain. That is concerning. That kind of stuff can linger, man, especially for a running back.
He's had a lot of that, too. Like, I feel like the calf has been flared up for him in the past.
A lot of flaring there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's been a lot of flaring. But,
tons of carries. How many?
Yeah.
That guy carried so much. You know, even when he was in Carolina.
Yep.
Always touching the ball out of the backfield. Like that's what happens, right? You get worn down. I hope not, because he's so talented.
He's so good, man. Like he's a cheat code. He scores a touchdown literally every single game. Literally every game the guy scores a touchdown, and he's just a dual threat. He can run for 100 yards, he can receive for 100 yards, he can be a decoy, he's big enough, he can throw a block for you.
Dude, one-man offense.
Guy's a machine.
Absurd.
Yeah, guy's a machine. And listen, Brock Purdy, I got a lot of time for Brock Purdy because of his story, Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick, third string, multiple injuries, he gets in there, and he's taken the ball and he's run with it. And it's been an incredible story. But it also has been an incredible team to play for. Like Kyle Shanahan, all the weapons, a great line, McCaffrey, Kittle, Aiyuk, Debo. If McCaffrey goes down and Aiyuk leaves, we're going to see the real Brock Purdy.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean he won't be good, but will he be great? We'll find out.
Yeah.
We'll find out. So more on that later this afternoon. But here's our TSN MLB insider, Steve Phillips, joining us here on OverDrive. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing great, guys. Good to be with you.
Yeah, good to be with you, too. We had Mark Shapiro speak today, and I have an appreciation for that. I'd like to hear from Mark more often. I think presidents of clubs, CEOs, he's got a lot on his plate, but he's the guy at the top, and he came out and he spoke, and I'm curious, where you stand on that. I think the sporting world's changed a little bit probably from when you were with the Mets. Now everyone's, president of baseball operations, and then there's a GM, assistant GM. There's massive staffs now. But the idea of the guy at the top coming out to speak, how important do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it is important, right, to be able to take accountability. I think that's what it comes down to is that, when we don't hear things, we fill in the blanks with what we make up, right, what we believe is going on. And so to be able to have Mark or any other team president, be available to answer some questions, to speak of, that if people are frustrated, you want to know that you're being heard and that your emotions are being felt. And I think that's why it's important that there's not this barrier where people are in an office not really in touch with what's going on around them. And I think that, the one thing that seems pretty clear, Mark's in touch with it. He always is. He does a good job in those press conferences. Like I was thinking as I'm listening to some of the questions getting asked, how I would answer it. And I'm lockstep with him in many of the ways that he would say the answer. Now I might not always have the same answer, but if that were my decision, I would answer it in the way that he did. And so I think it's an interesting take. And obviously, there's president speak. I mean, the one thing that I heard loud and clear, Ross is coming back, and I suspect John Snyder's coming back. Mm-hmm. That's what I heard in it without him saying that specifically. But, that he doesn't want to say those things publicly and everything else before the season's over. But continuity and consistency of the top organizations, that he has a lot of belief in that was pretty clear indication that the leadership is coming back.
Well, when you say, you were listening to it and trying to get ahead of it, like how would I answer that? What would I say in that moment? Put us in those shoes. Like, are you thinking from a standpoint of what do I want to say or not want to say for the fans, for the media, or for your own owner? Like, do you think of your owner's reaction to what you're about to say? Like, what is the priority list in terms of you filtering on the fly? Okay, how am I going to answer that? And how am I going to make sure I don't say something stupid here that's going to lead to a reaction?
Right. So those press conferences are pretty easy. Like, you can write the questions. You know what you're going to get asked about it. He knew he was going to get asked about Ross's future, about the manager's future, about the roster, about signing Bichette and Guerrero and the future of the roster, and is it a rebuild or a reconstruction? The budget, and was that going to be affected? Like, you anticipate all of those questions. And, there's things that, and when you're leading an organization, that you've got certain beliefs and policies. So, like, I'm not going to address publicly somebody's job and be direct with it, but I can at least give you a philosophical view, a big picture view of how I look at these things. Because what I don't want to do is answer this question in a way, then it opens the door for you to have to answer it for everybody else too. So you understand that once you respond to something in a certain way, you now have to respond to the next question and the next question, because you open the door for an answer to it. And so, there's sort of managing the media when you go through it, as you control what doors you open, what doors you don't. But I think that what his message, what he wanted to come out and do, is make it clear that he gets it, that there was a disconnect. I thought that was really a big part of what he said, is that we're not bad at evaluating talent, but we've not put that talent together in a way that makes it a good team. And that's what this team felt like this year. Like, individually, you've got some pieces that work, and really over the last couple of years. But, so for instance, Matt Chapman is a good player. He's a good player. He's a good player for San Francisco. He's a good player for them. But when you've lost Marcus Semien and you've lost Teoscar Hernandez and Lourdes Gurriel Jr., and you start saying, okay, we're going to make defense a priority, run prevention over run production, well, then Varsho makes sense because he's a great defender, but it's not understanding that you've just given up too much run production. So you accomplished what you wanted to by getting good defenders, Kiermaier and Varsho, but you've compromised the other component of your team. So you brought in good players who matched up and lived up to your expectation in many ways, not all the ways, but many ways, but they didn't combine together to make a team and a roster that made sense. And he said that's what he's talking to Ross about, is roster construction as opposed to the evaluation of talent.
I think we can all agree, like, there's a lot that needs to happen as far as the roster and the construction, as far as the team being a playoff contender for next year. Now, you talk about Ross Atkins and John Schneider coming back next year. If they were to not come back, like, is that just too much change for one off season? Like, there's going to be so many players that have to, come into this lineup. It feels like if they were to make changes, that's too much. Is that their way of kind of mitigating that by just saying Ross and John, they're coming back, because if they don't, it's just way too much for one off season?
Yeah. So I think a couple things. I think one, when it comes to Ross, you can look at it and think, well, this was a failed season. And Mark said that this is the biggest disconnect between what we thought our team would be and how we performed. And so we need to understand where we made mistakes along those lines. Where did we go wrong with that? And to understand it. They did make the playoffs in 3 of the 4 preceding seasons. And the one year that they didn't, they won 91 games. Now, I understand from a fan's perspective, they look at it and think, we never won a playoff game, so what good is it to be a playoff team? That being said, I might have thought last year Arizona's not going to win a playoff game, and they went on the way to the World Series. And so I think that front offices are evaluated a little bit differently than maybe how the fans would do it, that it is perceived to be a success that if you make the playoffs. Once you get there, you may not perform, you may not get it done, but it's not always a byproduct of how good your roster is. It's a byproduct of how good you played the 3-game series. And that's not always a great indication of the quality of your roster, because sometimes really good teams get eliminated in 3-game series. So I think that for Ross, there's probably some evaluation in the fact that they have had some success in building teams that have gotten there. When it comes to John Schneider, I think that's about their belief in him. that they believe that the coaches and manager have done a really good job of trying to keep things together this year. And so, it didn't sound like they were making any massive overhauls on coaching staffs at all. Now, I get consistency and continuity, but I also believe that change is sometimes what's needed too. It doesn't have to be massive, but there's got to be something different that makes fans and players and coaches and managers feel like it's going to be different next year, that we're not going to get in the same way where our codependency, we react when we lose this way, we act that way. When somebody underperforms this way, we coach them this way. You got to get some change in the dynamic in there somewhere. And so I think it's not a simple explanation for all of it, but I think Ross is back because of some of the organizational success prior to this year. And I think Snyder's back because they believe that he handled the adversity this year properly.
Steve, when you look at this core of players that are left after a pretty busy trade deadline, do you think that they stack up favorably against other top teams, maybe just in the American League, to keep it a little simpler?
Yeah, I think they can because they have. But they also have to evaluate why did they underperform. So I think they have to recalculate, and Mark Shapiro said this, handedness. Is it if we believe guy's a good hitter, but he's a right-handed hitter and he adds to our group of right-handed hitters, is that still better than getting a left-handed hitter who's maybe not quite as good a hitter, but the balance of the lineup might be better with it? What's better that way? And I think they've made the calculation always to go with the better hitter. I suspect that, for instance, I look at it and think Dalton Varsho is a really great defender. And he has some moments of that where swinging the bat, but I don't know that he fits. I think you might need to give up the great defense, right? I think Chris Bassett said yesterday he should be the platinum glove outfielder in baseball, and maybe he should, but I don't know that he fits on the roster. So I think you have to be open to, should we trade him? Will there be interest in him? There's 1 year left, but we might be able to find a team that has a guy that's a little better offensively, who needs to upgrade their defense. They need a center fielder. We can play him in the corner. We'll find a center fielder somewhere else. So I think they've got to really be open-minded to the creative way of rebuilding this team. And even some of the players who you think he's a really good player, and the evaluation is he's a good player, but he might not be the right fit. And I think they have to worry more about fit. And then it is the responsibility of the manager and coaches to bring the unit together in a connected way. And that's not solely on the front office, but that's on the manager and the coaching staff to make sure the lineup does fit together.
Yeah, I just feel like Blue Jay fans between now and next spring, like Shapiro speaking of continuity, which is something I agree with, yet I think Blue Jays fans' response to that, Steve, and I know what's coming, is Shapiro and Atkins have been here for 9 years. So it's not as if people are asking them to leave after 2. Right? It's been 9 years of continuity, and they haven't won a playoff game, and they're 10 games under 500 this year. And, the evaluation of players, you can't get George Springer from 2 years ago. Not coming. It's not going to happen. He's 2 years older. You're not getting Marcus Semien back. Alek Manoah's gone. He's gone. So, 2 years ago when they were rocking or felt like they were rocking, Manoah's gone, Semien's gone, and Springer, of who he was 2 or 3 years ago, that's gone. So I just don't know if you can apply, like, it's happened before to it will happen again in the future, because I don't know how they're going to find those guys. Like, how do you find an ace, a stud center fielder, and a stud second baseman between now and next year and say, see, we did it 2 years ago or 3 years ago, so we'll do it in 25. Right. I don't know how they're going to do that, Steve.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's where the creativity comes in. They're going to have to look at free agency. They're going to have to look at the trade market. They're going to have, the plan can't be internal improvement. That should be the understood expectation for everybody to see if we can't get more out of all of our players. But it can't be the plan that the way we're going to be better is we're going to fix the guys who underperformed, because what happens is you get regression in other areas. We've seen it with all kinds of teams where players have regressed in certain areas. And so you're right. You're not getting the George Springer from 2 years ago. So what you need to do is in building your team, you need to compensate for the diminished performance and get something more significant in another position. And so you need to find that guy, and you need to get creative. You're going to have to get a little lucky in some cases, but there's got to be the right balance of run prevention and run production. And it can't be just, we're going to go run prevention, let's go get all the best defensive players we can and see how it fits on our team, because that's not how to build the team, right? It's about, where are we going to get all of our production, and how are we going to balance and score as a roster, as a team. You look at the Cleveland Guardians, they're a team. And they move together, they play together, they literally look like a team on the field instead of a bunch of individuals. The way that they play, speed's a factor, manufacturing runs a factor, backing up plays, making plays defensively is a factor, turning double plays a factor, and then it's the high fives and the celebrations that are part of it. But it's connected in a way to have passion and determination to win games. And so they've got some. Look, it's not going to be easy. And they're threading a needle in some way to try to do it. It can be done, but it's going to take creativity and some good luck, and then some good coaching and managing and guys bouncing back, but also bringing in better talent than what was on the field this year.
Yeah, there's a lot of heavy lifting still to come, but I agree.
It would be really fun. By the way, Ross's job right now, it would be so much fun to do that right now, to look at it and think, okay, let's go. Where are we going? There's got to be a guy that finished the season in the minor leagues last year that's going to impact the major league team next year. He's going to be a minor league free agent. We need to find him. Who's it going to be? Who's that guy next year that maybe it's Luis Rengifo for the Angels. He's going to finish the season hurt with a bad wrist, but he's a guy that hit over 300. He can get on base. He can steal a base, got some pop. His value is going to be down because he's hurt. The Angels need to rebuild. Maybe we can get a value there and bring a guy like that in. Where else? It would be so fun to try to be creative to figure out all the different moving pieces and options that you can have, because you've got a good core of guys, and now you've got to have the fun of trying to figure out how can you bring it together to connect every piece in a way. They're one of the fun teams to think about how would you put it together for next year.
Well, I agree with your assessment that Shapiro, I think he said that today, it'll be Atkins that'll be a big part of that, and I think Schneider will be a part of it. And you're right. There's a blank canvas here. They got to find a way to fill it in, and they're going to sell that it can happen. We'll see if it will by this time next season. Great stuff, Steve. As always, buddy, we'll do it again soon. Thank you for this.
Thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it.
Steve Phillips, our TSN MLB insider. Yeah, listen, it's a fun job, but it's also a pressure-packed job because the approval rating is pretty low right now in the city. And, Blue Jay fans are not happy. I don't think they should be happy with the way things have played out. I think they had a pretty good trade deadline, but it was kind of a half-committed deadline because of what Shapiro said today. They're trying to win in 2025, so you got a lot of work to do. Let's see what you got. And they can't start until, the offseason more or less, but
if you don't do it next year, then what's the excuse going to be next year? What do you pushing
There can't
towards,
be one. There
right?
can't be one.
You said we're pushing towards 2025. If it doesn't happen then, what are you going to say? Nah, actually it's 2026. No one's buying that.
Well,
you know what I mean? You get one more year, I think.
I would think so, but I would have said that about the Leafs in the Core 4 3 years ago.
Right.
And to use another team in the city as an example, the city of Toronto and the teams are generally like, hey, just wait it out. We'll let you know. And I understand why Blue Jay fans, Maple Leaf fans, Raptor fans, you want to be optimistic. You want to believe in your teams. You want to believe it's all going to break your way. But a lot of it is reactionary, though. It doesn't. And then you look back and say, how could you do this? How did it get to this point? So, yeah, we'll see. All right, Donovan Bailey in about 15 minutes. Role play level of concern coming up at 5:30. Overdrive continues. TSN 1050 and on the TSN app. All right, Donovan Bailey coming up in about 15 minutes. Andre De Grasse did not qualify for the final of the men's 200.
That's tough, man.
Listen, he's a champion. He'll always be a champ, but father time, like they say. At some point it catches up to you, and he couldn't get there in the 100, couldn't get there in the 200.
And that nagging hamstring. I feel like that hamstring has popped up a little bit over the years for him, ever since he won that gold.
Yeah, listen, it's tough to keep going, man. It's really tough, especially in a field like that where there's just young guns coming for you all the time. And De Grasse has been a part of it for 8 years now. He was there in 16 making noise. We know what he did in Tokyo, and it's very difficult to just remain at the top of your craft year in, year out. And the crazy thing about the 100 meter, the 200 meter, like you have under 10 seconds to prove who you are. Like it's crazy, Strud. Like you have less than 10 seconds to prove who you are in the 100 meter.
Yeah, I had some games where I felt the same way. I had 10 seconds to have a good shift. But, listen, this he's been a great Canadian athlete, right? Mm-hmm. He's been, to me, elite. And he's always showed up and he's always competed really well. And unfortunately, injuries happen. And we see it across all different kinds of sports. And it just sucks because I think he's really proud to represent Canada. He's proud of what he's accomplished. Think about some of those races against Usain Bolt, mm-hmm. right? Arguably the greatest to ever do it.
Yeah, remember him chasing him down, looking at him and smiling. Bolt was kind of bent out of shape. Like, what are you doing? Why are we wasting energy early? And he's a showman. And De Grasse, he carried the flag for the opening ceremony, and he's a great Olympian. And so was Donovan Bailey. And Donovan will join us into the next hour. His take on what he's seen out of the games. And, Noah Lyles winning the 100-meter. And Donovan was talking about these new shoes and the way they're building tracks now and what kind of effect that could have on times in the future. Usain Bolt holds the world record, 9.58. Could you possibly see someone beating that? How? Like, how would it ever happen?
Jeez.
But we'll see what Donovan says about that and more still to come in the next hour. Overdrive continues. TSN 1050 and on TSN 2.